friends, my name is Jake. Welcome to Canadian Cutting Edge. And yes, I've got a little bit more decoration up here right now. This is lecture number, is it 25 or 26? I think it's lecture number 26 from Canadian Cutting Edge University. The university that teaches you everything that you need to know about the knife hobby. Well, maybe not everything. And there's no tests and there's no degrees. It's one of those universities. Tonight we're going to talk about what grind angle should I put on my knife. If you ask Google, the first answer that comes up is 20 degrees. Is that a good answer? Maybe. It's not a complete answer. They do link to a website that has a little more extensive answer. I want to give you a much more broad, complete answer to that question so that when you've got your knife out, you can decide what the best angle for that knife is. Or at least what are some good angles that are better than others for that specific knife. There's 4 things that you really need to consider when you're choosing a knife angle on a knife. You've got to think through all 4 of these in order to come up with a good angle. First, how is the knife going to be used? Second, what steel is the blade made of? Third, what's the shape of the knife? Because the shape of the blade and the kind of bevel that you have, the main bevel, that impacts the angles that you can use on that knife as well. And fourth, how soon are you willing to resharpen this thing? And I'm going to explain all 4 of those in more detail. So let's get to the tabletop so you can look at some knives while I talk about these 4 things and how they impact the grind angle that you should be putting on your knife. And just before we get there, I want to thank you for watching this video. I want to thank my supporters, my financial supporters. You guys are awesome. If you want to support the channel, patreon.com/CCE, or click the join button. It's right down there beside the subscribe button. And read the description, the video description below this video. There's links for referral links for different kinds of things, Amazon referral links, a tool store that's in the United States that uses mostly German but other European and some North American tools, all kinds of other stuff, coupon codes to save money and referral codes that don't cost you anything but help me out. Without any further ado, let's get this thing started. The first thing that I think you should consider is, what's the purpose of this knife? Are you going to be chopping wood with it? Like batoning a little bit? Well, if you are, is it going to be softwood or is it hardwood? Like, is it maple or spruce? That makes a difference as well. Or are you just going to be cutting some steaks? Maybe you're going to be, whittling some wood, maybe preparing some vegetables for a soup. What are you going to be doing with the thing? That makes a big difference. The material you're cutting is an important factor because different materials will dull your edge at a different rate. They'll also have an impact on, the likelihood of chipping an edge at a different rate. So you've got to consider what you're going to be cutting. An example, if you're going to be using a knife, maybe a knife like this, maybe something bigger as a fro that is for batoning, I already mentioned that, that wood type makes a huge difference. If you're batoning through some hardwood, I say that the angle that you're going to sharpen this at should be greater than the angle you need to sharpen it to if you're going to be going through spruce. Is the wood clean of knots? You can go on less of an angle. If you don't know exactly what you're going to be batoning, well, then you prepare for that as well. You be a little more conservative. At least I suggest you be a little more conservative. That is, using a greater angle instead of too shallow of an angle and risk damaging your knife. Some examples. If I was using this knife to baton some, let's say, some nice maple. I did that just a couple weekends ago when I was camping. I didn't use this knife for batoning, but I did baton some pieces of maple. It was machined maple, pieces that I picked up at a stair company in their firebox. I just break off little pieces with a knife and another stick and baton them off. I use this knife, not this knife, a knife like this at about 22 degrees because I knew I was going to be going through maple. I prepared for that ahead of time and it did a great job. Another example, something like this. This is a boning knife. So this is in your kitchen, right? Are you cutting through like a T-bone steak and you want to take the meat off the bone? or some other, maybe you're going through a ham hock and you're cutting all the ham off of the bone, or are you just cutting up a piece of meat? If you're actually going to be contacting bone, then you probably want it at a more steep angle than you would if you're not cutting through bone. So the angle is partly determined by what you're going to be cutting. The more tough the material is, the harder the material is on the steel, the greater the angle should be. The easier it is to cut the material, the shallower of an angle that you can get. So it's like a steeper angle to cut through stuff. So that's very briefly the first thing. What's the purpose of the knife? What are you going to be doing with it? Number 2, what's the blade made of? Yeah, it's made of steel. What steel is the blade made of? How tough is the steel? This thing has got a budget steel. I think this is 8CR13 MOV stainless steel. It's a fairly budget steel, a steel that I still like. This is 420 high carbon, but with Buck's heat treatment, so that's kind of good. Oh, it's S90V, so that's a very different steel. D2. This is, what does it say that? I forget what steel this is, but it's a true Damascus steel made in Japan. They say it's got a Rockwell of between 60 and 62, so that's pretty tough. S35VN, that's a different kind of steel. This is 10CR15 COMOV, so VG10. Sandvik 12Z27. There's a lot of different steels out there, and the steel that it's made of has an impact as well. So let's say you got this same knife and you're planning on using it for batoning through some spruce logs that have knots in it. Well, with D2 steel, it's pretty tough, but it's also got a little bit of a reputation for being a little bit brittle. Now, I haven't tested this. I don't know how well it's been heat treated. Has it been heat treated back to, say, 58 on the Rockwell C hardness scale? In that case, the D2 would be very tough. Has it been heat treated and left at 62 on the Rockwell C hardness scale? In that case, the edge is going to be a little bit more brittle. If you don't know the hardness of it, the least you can do is figure out what steel you've got and learn about the steel. Do some research. The tougher the steel you have, the more durable it is, the steeper the angle you can put on it. If you don't know anything about steels, there's one place to start, and that's with this guy, Dr. Larrin Thomas. Dr. Larrin Thomas obviously has that book. He's also on YouTube and a website. Knife Steel Nerds is what he calls it. He's got a PhD in metallurgy, and he's a knife nut. So he does all kinds of stuff. His father was a knife nut as well. That's where he got it from. And he's got lots of resources out there to teach you about steel. If you want to learn it, it's out there and available. Do be careful who you trust online, just like with everything else in the world. Dr. Larrin Thomas is one resource that you can totally trust. At least I believe you can totally trust, and he'll never steer you wrong about steel. He likes to play with high-end premium steels. A lot of his information is about that kind of stuff. I know this is a budget channel, but I think this video will probably get further reach than just to the budget knife guys. The more high-end the steel is, the steeper you can grind that cutting edge. The more budget the steel is, you need a more blunt angle if you're not going to damage the steel. 12C27, that's pretty much the most basic kind of budget steel that I like, along with 8CR13. They're fairly similar in terms of their quality and their hardness, their durability, the edge retention, all those kinds of things. That's why this knife has got a 20-degree per side angle. Also because I'm just using it for EDC. I don't have a given task for it. Just carry it sometimes as an EDC knife. And for me, the things that it's going to be cutting and the steel, 20 degrees per side is quite nice. But something like S90V and the purpose, look at this. This is a tiny little keychain knife. So it's not going to be doing hard tasks. And it's a high-end hard steel. So it's got a pretty shallow angle on there. I can take this thing out and zip through almost anything. As long as this blade is big enough to cut through it, this thing can zip through all kinds of stuff. It's a nice blade for those kinds of things. So the steel type is important. Number 3, we need to know the grind of the knife, like the bevel of the knife, the shape of the knife. You know, like this knife, we've got a flat grind here. It doesn't go all the way to the spine. It's thick and strong. This is a heavy duty kind of grind and blade shape and, you know, design. So it makes sense to put a heavy duty edge on it. Something that's not too shallow, you know, get something heavy duty. Now, something like this, we've got a hollow grind, and it's very thin behind the grind, and it's a folding pocket knife. It's an EDC kind of knife. So on something really thin and hollow like this, I've got a more shallow angle on here. I think I've got this thing at 16.5 degrees per side, and it just zips through stuff so easily. It's got a very fine, delicate tip, and you know, it's designed for doing light EDC duties, and it does them very, very well. Something like this. Yeah, this is I forget what knife this is a copy of, but basically it's a ripoff of another knife, but this is Sanrenmu. We've got a chisel grind. Now you got to think of that too. So the blade shape, we've got a grind here, we've got a grind here, so it's got main bevels just like normal, but this side doesn't have an edge bevel, only this side does. So let's assume that this angle is 0. Whatever angle we have here on the other side, that's the total grind angle. Like if we pivot it over, the total grind angle is the straight edge plus whatever I grind here. So if I just say, you know, 20 degrees per side, I put this on here, now I've got a 20 degree edge. But on this knife, I do 20 degrees per side, and it's 40. So this is half of this. So the grind angle, you have to be a bit steeper on a chisel grind than you are on a V grind that's on both sides. Another thing to consider is how thin is the edge just before, you know, the grind angle. This knife's fairly thick just behind that grinding. This knife is very thin just behind that grind angle. Like I said, this one's very thin behind that grind angle. A chef's knife, something like this. I just used this today to cut some watermelon, and it's a full flat grind, comes very thin at the edge. So I put a fairly shallow grind angle on that. This knife, it's another chef's knife, but it's ground differently. This is not a full flat grind. We've got, you know, a flat-ish grind. Where these dents are, it's fairly flat, and then the bevel starts, the main bevel starts there, and it comes down. So this is a thicker, heavier duty kind of knife, and it's a little thicker behind the very grind. Right at the edge of the grind, it's a little bit thicker than this guy is. So this knife is a heavy duty kind of chef's knife, and so I've got a higher angle on this guy. And again, what are you going to use it for? What steel is it? All those things have to be considered. So you have to think about a lot of things when you're working all this out. Number 4, where will you be working with this knife? Or what's the context of working with this knife? Are you taking, you know, a knife, probably not this, on a hike along the Appalachian Trail? You're going to be gone for 4 or 5 weeks, and you just won't be around anywhere to sharpen your knife? Or are you taking a knife and you're using it at home, you know, like a chef's knife at your house, and you've got your sharpening equipment nearby? You can sharpen it at a moment's notice, no problem. You know, those two things make a big difference. You know, if I was taking a knife and going on that hike on the Appalachian Trail, not that I can do that with my knees, my health issues and such, but I would probably put, you know, a steeper angle on it, something that's very durable, something that's very unlikely to chip out and break, something that's going to be useful for a variety of cutting tasks. I don't know what those tasks are going to be. I don't know what I'm going to face. You know, so I put on a higher angle. Or versus this thing, you know, I'm at home. I know I've got my sharpening equipment at home. I know I can fix this edge if anything happens to it quite quickly and quite easily. So on that knife, I'm willing to do a more shallow angle. So it'll cut a whole lot easier through stuff. And if I do end up making it dull, it's not a big deal. I can sharpen it on a moment's notice. Another thing to consider with that, is your knife a family heirloom? Is this maybe one of the original buck knives, but you want to use it anyway? You do want to carry it occasionally, and you know, you like the connection that it has with you and your family history or whatever. In that kind of scenario, I might put a steeper angle on it so that I'm less likely to do damage to it, you know, than I would, you know, with the knife that I bought myself and it's still in production. Well, this is too, but I'm still able to replace it if I wanted to, if I lost it or broke it or whatever. So in that case, I might be willing to do a more shallow angle. So there's all kinds of factors. I hope I didn't confuse you with any of this. I'm sure there's going to be questions down below. Let's go over a few more knives and what angle I chose to put on them. So here's my Buck 110. I decided to put 20 degrees per side on there. Why? Well, it's got a fairly soft steel. It's 420 high carbon, and it's got a thin edge, so that helps it go through things. I decided to put a more durable 20 degrees per side on it, and it's very useful that way. This guy, this is the, forgot the name, Ostapel design. This is a thin knife. It's a very pokey kind of knife. It's a full flat grind, and it's very thin behind the edge. M390 steel on this guy, 16 degrees per side. That's what I decided to put on there. This guy, this is my Penguin, but it's S35VN, and I went 17 degrees per side on this. It's a sort of a hard use kind of style knife, but it's also ODYSEE. And with the S35VN, that's what I chose to put on there. Utility knife. This is sort of like a sandwich knife. It's got a fairly low-grade steel on here, this Dow Strong. It's got, I think it's 4116, so it's, you know, Rockwell hardness on this is like 56, 57, something like that. I did 15 degrees per side on this. 15 degrees per side, and it works quite well for that kind of purpose. This guy, I still have to review this guy. What's the name of it? Z-CUT, forget the name of it. It's a Spyderco, and they're still available in a number of handle colors. This is BD1N stainless steel, which is a fairly high-end stainless steel in a full flat grind. And look how thin it is on the spine already. And at that edge, it's very thin. I'm not quite done testing it, but once I'm done testing it and I've made my video, I'm going to sharpen this thing down to about 13 or 14 degrees per side. You know, because I can sharpen it more if I want to. It's a very low-cost knife. I'll leave some links for it down below, actually, because I don't think they're making them anymore, and they might run out. And it's in the 20s of dollar. How about this knife? One of my viewers gave me this. Yeah, if you want to give me anything, just email me, jake@canadiancuttingedge.com. Email me and let me know, and you know, we'll make the arrangements. This is a hard use knife. It's the Griptilian. See how full thickness of the blade until you get to this main bevel here, and that's a short, you know, saber grind bevel. It's thick behind the grind. So I decided this is going to be a hard use ODYSEE, and I've got her at 20 degrees per side. Now it's S30V. It could handle a lower degree, but I wanted to make this thing super tough. And so I gave it a super tough angle, and it works great. I really like it. The Appalachian Drifter. Yeah, the Appalachian Drifter. That's probably why I talked about the Appalachian Trail. This is a hollow grind. It's quite thin, and the steel on this one is S35VN. So another good higher end steel. And being so thin and everything, you know, I sharpened this one to 16 degrees per side. That's what I decided. One type of knife that I didn't talk at all about in this video is knives with a Scandi grind. So this has got a Scandi grind on it. What's a Scandi grind? Well, it's a flat blade, and then it's got a short bevel just at the end, and a classic Scandi grind just comes down and it's right at the edge. Modern Scandi grinds sometimes have a micro bevel right at the edge there too. Now this kind of knife right here, the grind angle on this guy, it's usually between 11 to 14 degrees per side. Now because it's got the full thickness behind it, that thin edge right at the very apex gets supported right away. And all that support behind it means that you can get that shallow angle and still have a tough knife. Now what some guys do is they do a micro bevel. They've got the knife like this, and then they sharpen at the edge again just a tiny bit. Most guys do that between 18 and 20 degrees, just at the micro bevel. Because a knife like this is basically a woodcraft kind of knife. Certainly you can use it for a lot of other tasks, but it's designed to be super tough. And this is a good knife for batoning too, especially softwood. You have all that thick, heavy strength, and then you've got that sharp wedge that starts breaking the wood apart. I generally tell people don't sharpen a micro bevel on here more than once, maybe twice, if you're doing it very gently, not taking off a lot of steel. The reason for that is if you sharpen this edge, if you sharpen a micro bevel on here a number of times, you're going to put that edge back into the blade. You're going to draw it back like that. And then when you do want to sharpen this whole bevel, you're going to have to remove a truckload of steel to get that whole thing down to a new crisp edge. So better is resharpening this whole bevel each time and just giving it a crisp edge each time. And you're going to find that your Scandi grinds are just awesome. So this is sort of an aside, but I wanted to mention it anyways. Consider your steel. Consider what you're going to use it for. Consider the angle that everything's ground at. Consider what you're going to cut with it. And I'm sure you can come up with a good angle for your knife. Thanks for watching this video. Thank you everyone for liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing. And remember friends, always cut towards your chum, not your thumb.